And now, live from the studios of Freedom's Phoenix, Ernest Hancock.
I want to break free. I want to break free. I want to break free from your lies. You're so self-satisfied. I don't need you. I've got to break free. God knows.
Yeah, and everybody else listening knows we just want to break free. Now, we have our special guest, Phyllis Bennis. She is done a lot of writing on Middle East, on Palestinian-Israeli issues, Afghanistan, what's going on in the Middle East, and certainly Libya. And the one question I have for you, Phyllis, is there a justifiable military involvement? U.S. use American taxpayer money, go do something somewhere else? Or are you more, we just need to take care of here? Or what's your philosophy on that?
No, I'm an internationalist, and I don't think we have any right to say that all that matters is what happens here. We live in a world, and if the world is not safe and secure, we're not going to be either. So that's my starting point. I believe in international law. I believe in the United Nations. That probably is a little bit different than some of your listeners. I don't know. But for me, the question of being consistent and not operating on the basis of double standards and hypocrisy is very important. So if we're going to talk about an international responsibility to respond to the crisis in Libya, good. I support that. It doesn't mean necessarily military force, but an international engagement does make sense. But only if we're also going to say that about Bahrain, about Yemen, and about Israel, and not accept the notion that because the U.S. is willing to protect Israel, that we're not allowed to talk about it somehow.
Is there a limit, capacity to do it? I mean, how much of a lower standard of living should the Americans suffer in order to do this kind of international policing?
I don't think that most Americans would have to. I think that the upper 1% of this country, the corporate CEOs and the corporate bankers and the ones who are the heads of the money market accounts, those are the people who got us into the financial crisis. Those are the people who are making, in many cases, 250 times what the workers in their own factory earns, for instance. Yeah, I think those people can afford to give up their privileged standard of living. They don't need 15 Mercedes and 3 planes and 5 houses. I'm perfectly prepared to say they should give up their standard of living. The rest of us, yeah, we may have to deal with some consumption issues. We are 5% of the world's population, and we consume more than 30% of its resources. I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with that.
So who decides? I mean, yeah, you're right. We can get into a philosophical decision. I'm sure my audience understands my position.
It's about what happens in the real world. Our planet can't support that for very much longer. That's what climate change is about. That's what these wars over oil, which are soon going to be wars over water, that's what they're about, is over scarce resources, and they're getting scarcer all the time. Because we're using them up too fast.
So the international community should be run or ruled by what philosophy?
I don't think philosophies rule. I think people rule. I think that there are things about international law that we should be following, and there should be some kind of equality, that because a country is rich and powerful, that somehow it's not obligated to abide by the same rules that everybody else is. I think most people in this country want that, too.
I had a gentleman on, what was it? Reuben or Pearl. He had written a book. I keep getting them mixed up. And it was in 2004, so he wrote a book. And the point that he was making is that the entire planet, over half people, exist on less than $3 a day. And that was a justification by which we make too much and we need to be living on less so that they can live better. And of course, my question is, at what expense to us? I owe someone else what? I mean, are you asking for a global tax of some kind? And
there's an interesting plan, actually, for a very tiny global tax, not on you and me, unless you're a lot richer than I think you are, but a tiny global tax. It would be something like 1/10 of 1%, or maybe even less than that, maybe 1/100th of 1%, on financial transactions. So it's a tax on speculators. It's a tax on the rich speculators who have done so much damage to all of our economies. If there was that kind of a tiny tax, a group here at my institute has been working on it, it would produce billions of dollars every year, because the amounts of money that are in these international financial transactions are so much bigger than any of us ever imagined, that it would pay for AIDS drugs in all of Africa, for instance, clean water for every child in South Asia who today doesn't have clean water. I mean, it would pay for the enormous human needs that are so much less costly than these wars that we continue to fund as if there was no tomorrow.
You know, I understand that sentiment, and we've had a lot of guests, and we've had a pleasant conversation on that. And my first impulse is that no matter how much money we raise, one, they're going to want more. Two, you've created an infrastructure by which they're taking it from you. Three, you got who's in charge of redistributing it and who it goes, because it always winds up being the poor people in a rich country are funding the rich people in a poor country. I mean, that's the we have
now. That's been a big problem, and we should deal with that. I agree with you. I think that's a serious problem. We need a better way. More foreign aid isn't necessarily the issue. It's, for example, debt relief in poor countries goes much further. So there's a lot of solutions out there. There's no absence of solutions. What there is an absence of political will.
Well, you know, the debt relief means somebody doesn't get paid back, and especially if it was my money, I'm kind of, concerned about that. But,
are you concerned about your money that's going to pay for wars that you don't approve
absolutely.
of? That's what's happening. If we look, for example, I started to give this one example in Wisconsin, and I know we only have a couple of more minutes, but I just wanted to say, the people in Wisconsin who are fighting for the right to organize and the right to have their unions recognized and not to have these massive cutbacks, the state deficit that they're facing is $1.8 billion. Now, that's a lot of money. That's not chump change.
No, here in Arizona, we got as big a problem.
Well, how much money do you think the people of Wisconsin are paying in taxes just for their share of this year's war in Afghanistan? Turns out it's almost exactly the same amount. It's $1.7 billion of Wisconsin tax money is going directly to the war in Afghanistan.
This brings up a good point.
War, they wouldn't have a state deficit.
A very hardcore, no-compromise, anarchist libertarian economist made the point that when they were doing Obamacare was starting to come out, and the national health care system, he's going, before that, before we went into Iraq, and this was still an issue, then he's going, look, if you want national, I'll even give that to you if you'll stop waging war. Even though he's hardcore anarchist, if you'll do that, you want to play New Zealand and have national health care, you can assure us that you're not going to wage war anymore, maybe that sword I won't fall on. But it seems that whenever you create a mechanism by which they can pull money or extract it and have it to spend, regardless of whether it's United Nations or NATO or something, they always find an excuse to go to war.
Well, let me just give you one example of why things work sometimes better than you think. We have two really successful national health care systems in this country, and the people on them, the only demand they have is don't take them away. You have Social Security, you have Medicare that is providing health care for everybody over 65, pretty decent health care. Lots of doctors will only take Medicare these days. And you have the military medical system, which works really well for veterans.
Are these systems that you would like to see in the Middle East? If they adopt our system or our influence over there, that they can expect national health care in, say, Egypt?
Well, the irony is almost all of them have it. Libya, as a matter of fact, was number one in the ratings this year in the Human Development Index. That tracks 10 categories, things like maternal mortality, how many women don't die in childbirth, how many kids have primary education, how is the health care of the system. They have national health care. People in Tunisia, I know Tunisian Americans here, two of them, they go home to go to the dentist because it's free there.
Phyllis, are you able to say another segment or you got to go?
I really can't. I've got to go on to another one.
Phyllis, thanks for spending time with us and giving your perspective. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it too.
Phyllis Bennis, Institute for Policy Studies. We'll be right back.